You're making a mistake, Elias says, his voice hoarse but steady. Zaira doesn't answer. Her fingers move with precision, disabling the security feeds, rewriting access codes. The sterile glow of the containment chamber flickers, warning her that time is short. Zaira. Elias tries again, more urgently. They'll come for you. She knows. The high order does not tolerate defiance. But the alternative is unthinkable. He watches her, searching for an explanation. She doesn't offer one. Instead, she releases the last restraint. His body slumps forward, too weak to stand. Without hesitation, she moves to support him. You're risking everything, he mutters. She meets his gaze. You are worth the risk. Elias forces his body to move, leaning on her as they navigate the corridors. His training screams at him to distrust her. But instincts, logic, reason, none of it matters anymore. Only action. Where are we going? He whispers. Transport Bay, she replies. There is a vessel. It will not be tracked. Elias glances at her. You planned this. She doesn't answer. She has been planning since the moment she felt fear, real fear, not for herself but for him. A human. The alarms wail before they reach the hangar. They know. Elias breathes. She expected as much. Zaira doesn't slow. She moves with precision, guiding him through shadowed paths, bypassing security locks with coded overrides. The ship is within reach, a sleek craft designed for stealth. But the high order is already here. Zaira of the Virelian Ascendancy. A voice booms over the comms. You will surrender. Elias sees them first, heavily armed, methodical information. This is not a capture squad. It is an execution detail. You can still turn back, Elias murmurs. Zaira steps forward, shielding him. No. The lead enforcer tilts his head. You are irrational. She exhales. Perhaps. And then, for the first time in Virelian history, one of their own fires first. The ship cuts through the void, leaving the chaos behind. Elias grips the seat as Zaira pilots with inhuman precision, adjusting thrusters, calculating escape trajectories. The adrenaline hasn't faded yet, and he can still hear the echo of weapons fire, the scent of ozone from overloaded circuitry. You shot first, he says, more to himself than to her. Yes. His fingers tighten on the armrest. You killed your own. Yes. He studies her, but her face remains unreadable. He doesn't understand her. Not fully. Where are we going? Out of their reach. That's not an answer. She adjusts the controls. A human colony. Abandoned but functional. We will be safe. Elias exhales. Safe. It seems impossible. He watches her hands move over the controls, smooth and steady. Virelians are not meant to feel, not meant to hesitate, but Zaira had done both. He closes his eyes, exhaustion weighing heavy. Why me? She does not respond immediately. When she does, her voice is barely audible. You showed me something beyond survival. The colony is silent, a graveyard of human dreams. The structures remain, but the people are long gone, scattered by war, by time. Elias steps into the dust-covered streets, breathing in the stillness. You lived here, Zaira asks, scanning the remnants of a civilization once full of life. Not here specifically, he says, crouching to pick up a rusted trinket. A child's toy, forgotten in the Exodus. But places like this? Yeah. She watches him, the way his fingers trace the remnants of his past. There is no logical reason for sentimentality. And yet, she feels it too. Why did they leave? War, he answers simply. She already knew that, but she wanted to hear it from him. You should rest, she says, changing the subject. Your body is weak. Elias scoffs. Thanks, but he follows her inside. Time passes. Elias heals. Zaira learns. She studies the remnants of human culture, art, music, records of a species that refuses to die. She watches old transmissions of laughter, of sorrow, of dreams whispered into the night, and she understands. Not in the way of equations, not in probabilities, but in something deeper. Elias finds her one evening, staring at an old painting, fingers barely grazing the surface. The soft strokes of color, the emotion trapped in stillness. It is unlike anything her species creates. "Do you regret it?" he asks. She does not look away. "No," he exhales, stepping beside her. "Then what now?" She turns to him, something unreadable in her expression. "I want to understand what it means to love." Elias stiffens. "That's complicated." She tilts her head. "Humans always say that when they fear simplicity." He chuckles, shaking his head. "It's not simple, Zaira. Love isn't just a thing. It's a choice. It's messy. It hurts." She studies him. "And yet you choose it." "Yeah," he murmurs. "We do." She steps closer. "Then I choose it too." Elias freezes. "Zaira, I want to bear your child." The words hit like a shockwave. He stares at her, disbelieving. "You what?" She does not waver. "You said love is about legacy, about something bigger than yourself. I want to create something that has never existed before." Elias steps back, running a hand through his hair. "You don't even know what you're saying." "I do." "No, Zaira, you don't. This isn't just biology, it is more than biology." Her voice softens. "You told me about the human soul. I want to prove it exists." Silence. Elias exhales sharply, rubbing his face. "God, you don't do things halfway, do you?" "No," she admits. He laughs, though there's no humor in it. "Zaira, I don't even know if that's possible. You and me? We're different," she finishes. "But that does not mean impossible." His throat tightens. "Why?" Her gaze is steady. "Because I want to create something that is both of us. Something that will outlive war, outlive empires. Something real." Elias exhales, running a hand down his face. "You really believe that, don't you?" "Yes." His heart pounds. He should say no. He should tell her this is insane. But when he looks at her, he doesn't see an alien. He sees something new, something terrifying, something beautiful. He closes his eyes. "God help me," he mutters. And then softly, "Okay." Elias stares at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The weight of Zaira's words still lingers, pressing into his thoughts. The room is silent except for the distant hum of the colony's old power core. Across from him, Zaira sits motionless, watching. "You don't sleep, do you?" he mutters. "I do not require it." He sighs, rubbing his face. "Of course you don't." For a moment, neither of them speak. Then softly, "Are you afraid?" she asks. Elias lets out a short laugh, shaking his head. "I'd be lying if I said no." "Because I am not human? Because this is bigger than us?" he admits. "Because I don't even know if it's possible." Zaira tilts her head, considering. "Possibility is irrelevant. It is what we choose that matters." Elias exhales. "You say that like it's easy." "It is not easy," she corrects. "But it is simple." He sits up, elbows resting on his knees. "You really don't have any doubts?" Zaira is silent for a moment. Then, with uncharacteristic softness, "I fear the unknown." Elias looks at her, surprised by the admission. She has never spoken of fear before. "But you're still willing to try?" "Yes." He studies her, searching for hesitation. There is none. A small, tired smile tugs at his lips. "You're insane." "I have been called worse." Elias chuckles, shaking his head. "All right, alien girl. Let's see if we can pull off the impossible." Time becomes something else, measured not in days, but in progress, in questions, in discoveries neither of them expected. Zaira begins altering her physiology, studying human DNA with a precision that even Elias can't fully comprehend. She maps the differences between their species, calculates probabilities, rewrites biological codes. Elias watches in awe and in fear. "You're changing yourself," he murmurs one evening, watching as her skin pulses, subtly shifting. "I am adapting," she corrects. He leans forward, resting his arms on the table. And what if you go too far? What if you lose what makes you Virilian? She meets his gaze. Would that be so terrible? Elias stiffens. Zyra, you told me once that living is more than survival, she continues. That it is about meaning. If what I was before had no meaning, then why hold on to it? Elias opens his mouth, then closes it. He doesn't have an answer. Zyra studies him. You think I am losing myself. I don't know what to think, he admits. She tilts her head. Do you regret this? Elias runs a hand through his hair. No, he says finally. I just don't want you to do something you can't come back from. Zyra considers this. Perhaps I do not wish to go back. He exhales. Yeah, that's what scares me. Her body begins to change. Subtle at first, minor shifts in her molecular structure. A deeper warmth to her once cool skin. Then more drastic alterations. Her form becomes softer, her features less alien. The first time Elias brushes his fingers against her pulse, he feels it. Strong, steady, undeniably real. You have a heartbeat, he murmurs. Zyra places her hand over his. Yes. His throat tightens. This isn't just science anymore, is it? No, she admits. Elias swallows hard. Then what is it? Her fingers tighten around his. Proof. The first sign of life is faint, nearly imperceptible. But Zyra feels it before any scan can confirm it. A shift within her. Something neither human nor Virilian. Something entirely new. Elias watches the readings, his expression unreadable. He is a soldier trained to expect the worst. And yet, he looks at the data as if it is a miracle. Is it real? He whispers. Zyra meets his gaze. Yes. His breath shudders. He presses a hand against his forehead, overwhelmed. Jesus Christ. Zyra watches him carefully. You are distressed. He lets out a soft, disbelieving laugh. Distressed? Zyra, we just did something no one thought was possible. You're pregnant. She tilts her head. Does this not bring you joy? Elias runs both hands through his hair. I don't even know what to feel right now. He exhales sharply. This is insane. Zyra steps closer. Then why are you smiling? He blinks, touching his lips as if realizing for the first time that she's right. He is smiling. He laughs, shaking his head. Because you're impossible, that's why. Zyra places his hand over her abdomen. There is nothing to feel yet, no movement, no evidence beyond data. But it is real. And it is theirs. Elias exhales. God help us. Zyra tilts her head. Do you truly believe a God is watching? He looks at her, his expression softer now. I think, if he is, he just saw something he never expected. Weeks pass. The changes within Zyra accelerate. Her body, once so controlled, now moves with unpredictability. Pain, fatigue, emotions that she has never known before. Elias stays close. He learns what she needs, what soothes the growing strain on her system. He watches over her, not as a scientist, not as a protector, but as something more. One night, she wakes abruptly, breath ragged. Elias is at her side instantly. What is it? He asks. She grips his wrist, something desperate in her eyes. I feel it. His breath catches. You? She nods. Movement. Elias swallows hard. He places his hand against her stomach, waiting. Then, so faint he almost doubts it, a shift. Elias stares at her, eyes wide. Zyra, that's life, she whispers. His chest tightens. He has faced death more times than he can count. He has fought, bled, lost everything. But this is something else entirely. Zyra grows weaker. The strain on her body is more than either of them anticipated. Elias watches helplessly as she struggles to move, as her once flawless control falters. He brings her food, adjusts the temperature, does everything he can. But none of it is enough. You need to rest, he murmurs, brushing damp strands of hair from her face. Her breathing is shallow, but she still manages a small, tired smile. I will endure. Elias shakes his head. You shouldn't have to. She reaches for his hand. I chose this. His fingers tighten around hers. I know. She looks at him, something deeper in her gaze. Something raw, unspoken. Do you regret it? She asks. Elias exhales. Not for a second. Zaira closes her eyes. Then neither do I. He presses a kiss against her forehead, ignoring the fear clawing at his chest. You're going to be okay, he whispers, and for the first time he prays that it's true. Elias sits beside Zaira, his hands clenched into fists. The once sterile lab now feels suffocating, every machine beeping in a rhythm that taunts his helplessness. Zaira's skin is paler than before, almost translucent under the artificial lights. Her breathing is shallow, but steady. He watches, waiting for any sign of change. She stirs, barely opening her eyes. You are worried. His throat tightens. Of course I'm worried. She offers the faintest smile. I am still here. For how long? His voice is sharper than he intends. Your body wasn't made for this, Zaira. You're pushing yourself too far. I am adapting, she says softly. He shakes his head. You keep saying that, but... He stops himself, exhaling hard. You're barely holding on. She reaches for his hand, her fingers weak but warm. It is worth it. Elias swallows. You don't know that. Her grip tightens. I do. He closes his eyes. He wants to believe her. Weeks pass, each day heavier than the last. Zaira's condition worsens. She struggles to stand, to move, to even breathe without effort. Elias watches helplessly, forcing her to rest when she refuses, adjusting the environment to ease the stress on her body. One night, he finds her standing at the observation window, staring out at the vast emptiness of space. You shouldn't be up, he says quietly. She does not turn. I wanted to see the stars. Elias steps closer, his chest tight. You see them every day. Not like this, she whispers. Not like I might never see them again. His stomach drops. Don't say that. She looks at him then, something unreadable in her expression. Elias, if I do not survive, stop. You must listen. No, he snaps. You're not dying. I won't let you. Her eyes soften. You cannot stop the inevitable. His hands tremble. This wasn't supposed to happen like this. Zaira reaches for him, pressing his hand against her abdomen. But it is happening. He closes his eyes, feeling the faintest movement beneath his palm. A life neither human nor Virilian. Something entirely new. He exhales shakily. You have to survive this, Zaira. You have to. She smiles, but there is sorrow in it. I will try. More time passes. Every day, Elias wakes up afraid he will lose her. The machines monitor her vitals, warning him of the increasing strain on her body. The child is growing faster than predicted, accelerating beyond anything they prepared for. Zaira is nearly too weak to stand. And then the pain begins. She collapses, body trembling, as alarms blare through the lab. Elias is at her side in an instant, lifting her, his voice breaking. Zaira, stay with me. Her fingers dig into his arm, her breathing ragged. It is time. His blood runs cold. No, it's too early. You're not strong enough. She gasps, eyes squeezing shut. Elias! Panic surges through him. He moves fast, activating the automated medical systems, stabilizing her as best he can. Hours pass in agony. Zaira fights through the pain, her body straining against limits it was never meant to reach. Elias does everything. Monitors the vitals, adjusts the atmospheric conditions, keeps her from slipping too far. And then, in a moment that feels both endless and instantaneous, a new sound fills the lab. Small, fragile, alive. Elias stares, chest tight with disbelief. The child, tiny, impossibly delicate, draws its first breath. Its skin is pale, luminescent like Zaira's, but its eyes are human. Zaira is silent. Elias turns to her, heart stopping. She is too still. Zyra? His voice is barely a whisper. She doesn't respond. Zyra, wake up. His hands tremble as he presses them against her. Come on. Open your eyes. Nothing. His vision blurs. He shakes her gently. Please. The machines drone, signaling a fading pulse. Elias grips her shoulders, desperation clawing at his throat. You don't get to leave. You hear me? You don't get to do this. The infant lets out a soft, uncertain cry. Elias barely registers it. He presses his forehead against hers, voice shaking. You told me you'd adapt. You told me you'd survive. Silence. Then, a breath. Shallow, fragile, but real. Elias jerks back, watching as Zyra's eyes flutter open. She is weak, barely clinging to consciousness. But she is alive. He lets out a broken laugh, wiping his face. You scared the hell out of me. Her gaze drifts toward the small figure in his arms. Elias carefully shifts, holding the child so she can see. Zyra's lips part, eyes filled with something indescribable. She reaches out, her fingers barely brushing against the newborn's skin. A miracle, she whispers. Elias swallows hard. Yeah, I think so. Zyra's eyes flick to him, and for the first time, there is something entirely human in her expression. You were right, she murmurs. About what? His voice is soft. Life is more than survival. He exhales, looking down at the child in his arms. Yeah. His grip tightens protectively. It is. Outside, the stars burn bright, watching over something never meant to exist. And yet, against all odds, something that does. Elias watches Zyra as she rests, her breathing steady but weak. The child sleeps in his arms, impossibly small, a being that should not exist. And yet, here they are. His mind still struggles to process everything. The weight of it all is suffocating. But he doesn't dare move. Zyra stirs, her eyes opening slowly. You are still awake. He exhales softly. Yeah. She studies him, her gaze drifting to the child. You are afraid. Of course I am. He shifts slightly, adjusting his hold. I don't even know what happens next. Zyra's fingers brush against the baby's arm, her touch feather-light. We survive. Elias lets out a dry chuckle. That's not much of a plan. She tilts her head. It is enough. The baby stirs, tiny fingers curling against Elias' shirt. The sight tugs something deep in his chest, something unfamiliar and overwhelming. He swallows hard. You should rest, she murmurs. So should you, he counters. A small smile touches her lips. I will try. She closes her eyes again, exhaustion pulling her back into sleep. Elias remains awake. The days pass in a strange blur. Zyra recovers slowly, her strength returning in increments. Elias never leaves her side for long. The child, still unnamed, grows stronger, adapting to its impossible existence. Elias watches every change with wary fascination. You study them like an experiment, Zyra observes one day. Elias sighs, rubbing his temples. Can you blame me? No one has ever seen something like this before. I don't know what to expect. Neither do I, she admits. He glances at her. That doesn't bother you? She shakes her head. Uncertainty is part of life. Elias exhales. That's easy for you to say. She watches him for a long moment. You are not just afraid for them, she says quietly. You are afraid for yourself. His jaw tightens. I didn't ask for this, Zyra. She tilts her head. Would you change it if you could? Elias opens his mouth, then closes it. He doesn't have an answer. Zyra smiles knowingly. I did not think so. He shakes his head, muttering under his breath. You're insufferable sometimes. I have learned from the best. Despite himself, Elias laughs. The child is different, not just biologically, but in ways neither of them can fully understand. Their development is accelerated, their intelligence evident far sooner than should be possible. By the time weeks have passed, It is clear that they are not merely a combination of human and Virelian, but something new entirely. Elias watches as the baby reaches for something unseen, their gaze sharp and calculating in a way that should not belong to an infant. Zyra notices too. They are aware. Elias nods slowly. More than they should be. The child turns their gaze toward them, their expression unreadable. For the first time, Elias wonders if they are something more than just a miracle. Zyra regains her strength, but something is different. She moves slower, her reactions not as sharp. Elias watches her carefully, concern growing by the day. "You're still weak," he says one evening. She shakes her head. "I am changed." He frowns. "What do you mean?" She hesitates. "I do not know." Elias doesn't like that answer. One night, he wakes to the sound of movement. He turns sharply, finding the child standing. Not crawling, not stumbling, but standing by Zyra's bedside. His breath catches. "That's not possible." Zyra stirs, her gaze landing on the child. There is no fear in her expression, only understanding. "They are more than us," she says softly. Elias swallows hard. "What does that mean?" Zyra does not answer. The child looks at them both, their eyes filled with something Elias cannot name. And then, for the first time, they speak. "Alive." The single word sends a shiver down Elias' spine. Zyra smiles. "Yes." Elias exhales shakily, running a hand through his hair. "Holy hell." The child blinks at him. "Father." Elias freezes. His pulse stutters. Zyra watches, waiting. Elias exhales. "Yeah, kid." His voice is rough. "I guess I am." The child tilts their head. "Mother." Zyra nods. "Yes." Elias grips the edge of the table. "Okay, this is happening." Zyra tilts her head. "You are overwhelmed." "Understatement of the year," he mutters. The child steps forward, placing a small hand against his chest. Elias stills. A warmth spreads from that single touch, something unfamiliar, something impossible. Zyra watches carefully. "They are connected to us." Elias exhales, meeting her gaze. "What did we create?" She does not answer. But deep down he knows something new, something unknown, something that will change everything.